believe it or not, I think it's a good idea. The problem is that Tom will never go for it. Because Tom only cares about money. One of the problems that we have inside of any organizations is that we make the wrong assumptions about people. And one of the things that you see in any endeavor, if you begin with the wrong assumptions, no matter how hard you work, no matter how smart you try to be, it doesn't go very well. And I think that there are two false assumptions inside of organizations, two assumptions that are flatly wrong, that if we beginning with those assumptions, we run awry. One false assumption inside of organizations is this, that human beings are machines. Complicated machines, but basically mechanistic. That is, if we press the right levers in the right way, people will pretty much do what you want them to do. Okay? That human beings are semi-sophisticated robots, and if you just sort of move the right levers properly at the right time, human beings will respond in the way that you expect them and want them to do. That is not true. Your intuition tells you it's probably not true. 50 years of science verifies that. That is not true. If you think of human beings, the human beings you're leading, whether in a private organization or in a public organization, as simple machines, you will run awry. Human beings are far more complex than that. That's the first nefarious assumption. The second assumption is even uglier, I think, but it's persistent. And that is the belief that human beings are blobs. I've had this conversation with managers. They say, Dan, I know what you're saying. I get what you're saying, that sort of doing things out of a sense of intrinsic motivation, that giving people lots of freedom, that people will do better. And I generally agree with that, but what you don't understand is that I have to deal with these people. They're not like that. They're basically passive and inert. If I didn't threaten them with sticks or entice them with carrots, they would just sit there and do nothing. Now that is a theory of human nature. I think it's the wrong theory of human nature. The wrong theory of human nature. I do not think our nature as human beings is to be passive and inert. I think our nature is to be active and engaged. That is our essence. That is our nature. Why do I believe that? Do I believe that because I'm some kind of woolly-eyed optimist? No. I believe that because I have 3 kids and I've seen a lot more kids. I defy you to find me a 2-year-old in any country in the world who is passive and inert. I defy you to find me a 4-year-old who is not active and engaged. That is, I'm a nerd, as you probably have detected, and I want to use a metaphor here. That is, in computer terms, that is our default setting. All right? When the product ships from the factory, that's the default that is checked. Our nature is to be active and engaged. Now, I think that events and circumstances can conspire to change the default and make people passive and inert, but I think our essence as human beings is to be active and engaged. And another reason I believe that is not only by looking at kids, is that when I talk to those managers, and I ask them, well, you think that these other folks who in your organization are passive and inert and lazy and respond only to carrots and sticks, is that how you are? Everyone says, oh, no, I'm different. But you're not that different. Get rid of those 2 assumptions, that human beings are machines and that human beings are blobs, and it takes you in far more promising directions. And what's exciting about that is that this body of science shows us what that direction looks like. Okay, so let's talk about what does work, especially for the complicated, conceptual, creative tasks that most of you out there and in here are doing. There are 3 key elements for enduring motivation for these more complicated tasks. The science shows us 3 key motivators here. They are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. AMP. AMP. Completely inadvertent that it ended up that way. AMP, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's talk about autonomy, okay? We're going to talk about these 3 things. Autonomy. To talk about autonomy as an enduring motivator for things, we need to talk about another concept, another word. We need to talk about the word management. Think about the word management. We sometimes don't consider that word carefully enough. We look at management the way we would look at a river or a tree or a mountain. When you go by a river or a tree or a mountain, you don't stop and say, wow, where did that come from? You just say, oh, it's, for most, all intents and purposes, it's always been here. That's how we think about management. But management didn't emanate from nature. Management wasn't delivered to us from God. Gary Hamel has said this the U.S. management strategist, Gary Hamel has said this very, very well. Management is a technology. Management is a technology. It's something that some guy invented. It's a technology from the 1850s. How many technologies do we use from the 1850s today? It's an 1850s technology. We might rub out some of the rough edges, but we don't, I mean, the telegraph is an 1840s technology, and you could get the smartest minds in the world to take a telegraph for the last 200 plus years, or 250 years, and build the world's most awesome telegraph, right? It's still a telegraph. I'm still going to text you, not send you a telegram. Management is a technology designed to get compliance. That's what it is for. It is a technology designed to get compliance. But we don't want compliance in our organizations today. Our organizations are too complicated. We want engagement. And management fundamentally does not lead to engagement. Management leads to compliance, but self-direction leads to engagement. Self-direction leads to engagement. And you can ask yourself this question. Ask yourself to think about, or ask somebody to tell you about their best boss. Their best boss. Who's the best boss you ever have? You very rarely see people say, let me tell you about my best boss. She was awesome. She breathed down my neck the whole time. She told me exactly what to do. She gave me no freedom. That's not how human beings engage. We engage through self-direction. And what this means is that in any kind of an organization, but particularly in a church organization or a nonprofit organization, where you don't even have many carrots to give out. What works a lot better is autonomy, and particularly giving people autonomy over various dimensions of their work. Autonomy over their time, autonomy when they do what they do, autonomy over their team, who they do it with, autonomy over their task, what they actually do, and autonomy over their technique, how they do it. Autonomy over those four elements, time, team, task, and technique, that's what leads to engagement. And what's cool is that there actually are some organizations out there that are taking this very radical approach to autonomy and delivering very good results. Let me tell you about some of these examples from around the world because I think they're really interesting and even in their own way exciting. Example one. There's an Australian software company called Atlassian. Okay? They do something really cool. Once a quarter, they say to their software developers, on a Thursday afternoon, go work on anything you want, as long as it's not part of your regular job. Go work on anything you want, as long as it's not part of your regular job. All we ask is that you show what you've created to the rest of the company on Friday afternoon in this kind of fun, all-hands meeting. Okay? They call these things FedEx days. Why? Because you have to deliver something overnight. It turns out that that one day of intense, undiluted autonomy, has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of new ideas for products, a whole array of ideas for reforming what goes on within the company that had otherwise never emerged. Okay? This is not the biological drive. This is not the reward and punishment drive they're tapping. They're tapping that third drive. They're starting with the assumption that people are active and engaged and want to do good work. And in some ways, if you get out of their way, that's what leads to great results. It's worked so well that they've upped the ante at Atlassian. So now at Atlassian, they do something called 20% time. 20% time. And what that means is that at this company, people can spend 20% of their time working on whatever they want. Now, this is done, as many of you probably know, most famously here in America, at Google. Google has been doing this almost since its inception. And it turns out that it's a pretty smart move on Google's part, because Google is not signing away the intellectual property rights to what's created during that 20% time. which is very shrewd. Has anybody ever today, let's take a little survey of the audience here, has anybody today, or not today, this week, used Google News, looked at Google News to check the news? All right, lots of you. Google News is terrifying the newspaper business around the world. Google News, not an official project, a 20% project. Does anybody have a Gmail account by any chance? Wow, everyone has a Gmail account. Gmail, not an official project. Gmail was a 20% project. And if you go into Google and interview the people here, you see things like what Alec Proudfoot says. He says, just about all the good ideas here have bubbled up from 20% time. Sort of makes you wonder what they're doing the other 80%, but still proves the point. So how do you bring this into play, whether it's in your church or in a private sector organization? I think it's difficult, and I actually think you need to go slow. Think about this for a second. Think about, imagine a guy named Fred. Fred works at your company. Fred works at your company. Fred's been working at your company for 20 years, doing things pretty much the same way for the last 20 years. You can't go into Fred on Monday morning. Hey, Fred, how was your weekend? Oh, pretty good. I got something to talk to you about, Fred. What? Get ready, Fred. 20% time, baby. Fred's gonna wig out, right? That's too abrupt, that's too much. That's too much. What you need instead, and again in the organizations, is that one of the scholars behind this, the new research in motivation is a fellow named Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester in New York in the US. And Richard Ryan talks about the need for, it's a lovely term, for scaffolding. Okay? If you want people to be more self-directed, it's not an off-on switch. It's a dimmer switch, and you got to provide some scaffolding for people to get there. So what can you do? Well, in your organization or your church, you can try a FedEx Day. Why not? It doesn't cost anything. I think people will knock your socks off with FedEx Days. What I've seen in organizations around the world is that the first time people try a FedEx Day, it's pretty good. The second time they do it, it frickin' rocks. Because you're tapping that third drive. You could even try your own modified version of 20% time, what I would call 20% time with training wheels. So think about this, because I do think that most organizations can't go straight to 20% time. It's too abrupt. But you can do the scaffolding. You can do 20% time with training wheels, or in the UK they call training wheels stabilizers, all right? 20% time with stabilizers. To me, that sounds like a pharmaceutical, but that's just my American bias. 20% time with training wheels. How would that work? Let's not make it 20% time, let's call it 10% time, right? Let's start with 10% time. What's 10% time in a 5-day work week? It's one afternoon a week. Who among us has not squandered one afternoon a week at work? Let's redeploy that to cool individual projects that help the company, that help the organization. And don't do it for everybody. Do it for a group of people who you think would be most receptive to it. And don't do it forever. Do it for 3 months or 6 months. 20% time with training wheel. Start providing that scaffolding to give people that self-direction, that autonomy over their time, over their team, over their task, over their technique. That's how human beings engage. That's how they do great things. Let's go to the next one. Remember, we have AMP, AMP. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's talk a little bit about mastery. Think about something. Think about a weekend, whether you are in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or whether you're in Stockholm, Sweden, or whether you're in Chicago, Illinois. On a weekend, you're going to have somebody in one of those cities probably spending part of his time on the weekend playing the bassoon, okay, that wind instrument, right? Playing the bassoon. Now, playing the bassoon on the weekend is strange behavior, right? I mean, strange in the sense that a biologist can't explain that, right? Playing the bassoon on the weekend doesn't satisfy your biological drives, right? Okay? An economist has a hard time explaining this because playing the bassoon typically doesn't make you a lot of money, right? It's the bassoon.